We're dealing, of course, today with the 201 trade case and its impact on trends and forecasting. And like so many steps along the way in this journey on this 201 trade case, we've got more. We've had an announcement, and we've got more certainty on what this means for the market. But there remains a long list of items awaiting clarification, and a lot of these things, unfortunately, are open to interpretation. So, in hopes of providing you guys with a little more of our understanding of what awaits us all, we've invited a couple of our friends here to treat on some of the, I guess, more intimate aspects of the 201 trade case and really try to take a market approach for what it means. So we're happy to get started here, and we'll lead off with Alex McDonough, who's going to walk us through some specifics on the wording of the announcement and some of the finer points on what it might mean. Thanks, Alex.
Great, thank you for having me. So I'm going to start with a policy overview of the President's decision and pass it off to my colleagues to talk about what the impact of that decision is on the market. So after 6 months of the solar industry making its case, the President imposed tariffs on CSPV modules and cells with very minimal exclusions. The President had 100% discretion here, despite the process that the industry engaged in before the International Trade Commission and USTR, which took many months last year. According to Green Tech Media, it's expected to reduce the pipeline of solar construction in the US by 11% through 2022. That's 7.6 gigawatts roughly over the next 5 years, unless the tariff remedy is changed sooner than that. So in front of you, you can see the basic structure of the remedy imposed in the President's proclamation, which is a tariff on modules and cells that declines over the course of 4 years. We can go to slide 2. So here's some more details about what that remedy entails. So first, on modules, it's a 30% tariff on all imported CSPV modules imposed beginning February 7th. That tariff will decline each year, each February 7th for the next 4 years by 5%. So it will begin at 30%, declining to 25%, then 20%, then 15%. On cells, the proclamation includes what's called a tariff rate quota, which allows 2.5 gigawatts of imported cells to be exempt from the tariff each year. That's an annual exemption. However, all imported cells after that 2.5 gigawatts is subject to the tariff, beginning 30% and declining 5% each year on the same schedule as modules. The next important consideration are who's exempted. As I mentioned, there's a list of countries that are exempted, but in its actual impact is pretty minimal because most of those countries are not major manufacturers of CSPV. The specific exempted countries include WTO beneficiary countries, which are mostly developing countries, with a couple exceptions. And the exceptions to those countries that do have some material solar manufacturing include Jordan and India. Contrary to some expectations prior to the decision, Singapore was not exempted, and then Canada and Mexico were also not excluded. Singapore in particular was recommended by the International Trade Commission. All of the commissioners in their 3 decisions, or 3 proposed recommendations, recommended that Singapore be exempted, but the White House ultimately went the other way. Another important item here that's not on this slide to consider is how the thresholds for these exemptions. So first of all, they're not limitless. The tariffs will be imposed after imports from an exempt country surpass 3%. So if Jordan, for example, exports solar panels to the United States and those imports surpass 3% of our total imports, then the tariff will be imposed against Jordan. Additionally, there's a 9% cumulative threshold from all exempt countries. So if any collection of 1, 2, or more of the exempt countries exceeds 9% of total imports, then the tariffs will be blanketed across all those exempt countries, and there will be no exemptions. Furthermore, we also don't have guidance from Customs and Border Patrol, which is the implementing agency, on how those thresholds will be counted and when we will know when those thresholds are met. This may be purposeful. We may not have that guidance because they may be concerned about people gaming and trying to continue importing after those thresholds have been surpassed. We can go to slide 3. So, as I mentioned earlier, there may be some potential for the remedy to be changed, and I'll go through a few of those different scenarios. First, and most current, is the WTO consultation process. In the proclamation, paragraph 12 of the proclamation specifically, the White House left open the possibility of changes as a result of this consultation with WTO countries. WTO countries have 30 days from January 23rd to make their case to the administration, and then 10 days after that 30 days ends, the president will make a final decision on whether any changes will be made based on the consultation process. Trade experts don't seem to think that is a likely outcome, that there will be changes, but it is still possible, and that consultation process is happening. Several countries have formally requested that consultation, including South Korea, China, Mexico, Taiwan, and most recently the EU 2 days ago. The second opportunity is a settlement, and this has been a discussion that's been happening for many months, predating this Section 201 proceeding even. The possibility of some global settlement with China in particular to eliminate tariffs for polysilicon that China has imposed that has damaged the U.S. polysilicon industry, in exchange for the U.S. dropping tariffs against Chinese solar. Those discussions, as I mentioned, have been going. They have not borne fruit, but China most recently upped their leverage by launching an investigation against U.S. exported sorghum to China, which would be extraordinarily painful to U.S. sorghum farmers who export 3/4 of their crop to China. So there is clearly an effort to create leverage in response to this decision, and to that could potentially lead to some discussion of some negotiation. The next possibility is the midterm review. The midterm review is required in the 1974 Trade Act. It's required by statute, and that means that the White House must take another look at the effectiveness of the tariffs in 2 years after they go into effect. So that'll be in 2020. As a result of that midterm review, the White House may decide that the tariffs are ineffective, not effective enough, or the domestic manufacturing industry is beyond hope and the tariffs aren't bearing fruit, or they can respond to WTO challenges and make changes to the remedy altogether. And then a final possibility for modification, which is not included on this slide, is a product exclusion process, which was announced in the proclamation. The U.S. Trade Representative will publish procedures on seeking a product exclusion around February 23rd. Until they release that guidance on the procedures, we won't have a great idea on what they have in mind and how productive that process will be, but it's certainly something to look at. Next slide, please. So I just want to take a second to talk about the extraordinary effort that went into shaping hearts and minds, which the solar industry spent significant time on and I think succeeded. You can see here that we have major publications that weighed in favor of the bulk of the solar industry's position against tariffs. We had a bipartisan, broad-based coalition, including conservative organizations, liberal organizations, and industry that strongly opposed the tariffs. So the public message is firmly opposed to taxing solar unfairly, and we need to keep that pressure in order to potentially see changes in these tariffs in the near future. Because if that pressure does not continue, and the administration believes that these tariffs are working and not harming the industry, then it will be much more difficult to make the case that they should be repealed or modified. Next slide, please. And then finally, I don't want to spend a ton of time on it unless there are questions, but what's next? We see aluminum and steel tariffs likely on the horizon. The Commerce Department has undergone a lengthy investigation, and there has been speculation of a potential 20% tariff last year discussed. The recommendations have gone to the president in January, and we expect a decision on steel and aluminum tariffs by mid-April, but they could potentially come sooner than that. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, Alex, for that very thorough review of what we know and what we hope to have clarified in the coming months. Next, we'll turn it over to Chris Masys, our Senior Key Account Manager with REC Group. Take it away, Chris.
Thanks, Josh, and thanks, Alex, for the painting of the picture policy-wise behind which is driving all this. I guess I get to be the lucky presenter here, representing a company that is directly impacted by these tariffs. But the reality is that we are all either directly or indirectly impacted here. So I think the transparency and communication and understanding what are we all going to be working with is ultra important. So thank you to AEE for putting this together. Left to right here is basically the sequencing of what Alex alluded to in a previous slide, which is that there had been a echoing of repeated sentiments that Singapore should be excluded from this trade action. So in the audience, if you thought that you heard this along the way, you're absolutely right. You heard it several times, which was in the initial injury determination, meaning Singapore was not a cause of substantial injury to the domestic PV manufacturing industry. The recommendations at the end of the US ITC process basically reiterated that, even in the US Trade Representative review. So it was a much larger than a small surprise to REC, who is basically the only manufacturer of solar products from Singapore, that the final tariff action did not have a Singapore-based exclusion. We did have our Washington team talk to some of the folks in the USTR office, and interestingly enough, apparently there were two versions of the proclamation. One of them did have a Singapore exclusion, the other one did not. So it was literally up until the last minute, and gives a little bit of window into how this presidential administration is working. And of course, the head of the US Trade Representative is Robert Lighthizer, who is very much carrying out a protectionist Trump agenda. But the reality today is that all reputable vendors are going to be subject to a tariff. Basically, anyone outside of the US, meaning that we have somewhere around a 10 cent per watt, what I call non-value added cost to work with. It's not something that we're necessarily celebrating, any of us, but it's something that we do think is workable. There's a ton of opportunity in the US market. I think it's important to keep optimistic because there is a lot of potential out there if everyone acts in an intelligent manner to go out and get business done still. Specifically how REC views the US market is that, number one, the question we get asked most often is, well, now do you get cold feet in the US market or other global markets? Basically, all of the large reputable manufacturers have global activities in Europe, in Asia Pacific, some in the Chinese domestic market, Japan, and all in other places. So to what degree, if the US is somewhere around a 10 gigawatt market and the global market maybe as big as 100 gigawatts, if it's only 10%, does this create complications that make you want to pull out of the US market and de-emphasize it? The answer for REC is a very clear no. The US market is extremely important. Even with this tariff, it will still be close to the largest market, if not the largest market globally for REC. So you have REC's commitment, both through Sunrun and AEE and to the end market, that we are here to stay. The other question we're asked quite a bit is, wow, well, if this tariff is literally kicking in, the US Customs and Border Patrol got the instructions to apply this tariff 2 days ago, what's going to happen to pricing? Is it going to be much higher than what I'm used to? Is it going to be something else? Is there going to be a period of volatility? And interestingly enough, because the outcome of the tariff was so close to what the majority of folks had already expected anyway through the course of Q4, really, I think we get a period of stability here. At the end of the day, stability is a very good thing because no one has to wait on the sidelines. You don't have to wait for answers to questions. Stability is a positive business environment. The negative outcome for a company such as ours, where we do have exposure into the utility segment, is that you probably will see some price elasticity of demand mechanics working through there. Just to be very blunt and I guess high level about the project level economics, utility projects can build, meaning total turnkey, as little as $1 a watt per these days in 2017, where a residential installation may be 3 times that. So basically you have literally 1/3 or less of the impact in the residential segment. So that's something that we'll address a little bit more in this next slide, which is basically from the fundamental product classes, there's 2 form factors that REC works with, which is commonplace in this industry. There is a 72 cell form factor, there is a 60 cell form factor. For our business, the 60 cell product is used almost entirely in residential, 72 cell almost entirely in utility and commercial. If you look at the size of the US markets, most analysts agree somewhere around 12 gigawatts is what it was last year. Somewhere around probably 7.5 gigawatts was utility. That's over 60%. That's going to be the sector that is most heavily impacted by this. However, those players also had large balance sheets or access to capital and engaged in lots of stockpiling activities. Sunrun also did some very smart things with the AE business, which Dirk will talk about in a little bit here. But will there be a shrinkage of demand within 72 cell products from the utility segment? Absolutely. I think that the 72 cell distributed generation, meaning behind the meter market, will be a bit less impacted than that. And the 60 cell market least. So that's how a manufacturer such as REC views this. And may we go back to our production plan and sort of calibrate our production lines and maybe push more of the volume towards 60 cells than 72? Very possibly. Those decisions have not been made, but obviously we need to be producing the product that the market wants. So this is how we view the likelihood of 2018 here.
Thank you very much, Chris. Next up, we've got my colleague Dirk to talk about what this means for Sunrun and AEE and perhaps the market in an overall fashion.
Okay, good morning. Thanks for having me. Chris, thanks to you for REC being a long-term reliable supplier to Sunrun and AEE, and for being ongoingly committed to the US market. That's an important part to have a stable supply base. in regards to the market developments, I'd like to comment on a short-term development, first half 2018, and then medium and long-term implications as well. As Chris already pointed out, a number of suppliers had already changed their pricing levels in anticipation of tariffs, and that worked out pretty well. So the immediate future does not really hold any major changes. There's also significant volume safe harbored inside of the US prior to the implementation of the tariffs. So for the next couple of weeks, this is a relatively stable market. As Alex pointed out at the beginning of the webinar, there is a few remaining uncertainties that will be solved in the next, say, 4 to 8 weeks in regards to company or country exclusions. As those are being settled, then we will really know what the long-term implications are. One of the things that is likely to happen is, once again, a realignment of supply chain. As we have seen in the first trade case, there was some move of manufacturing capacities to outside of China and Taiwan. In the first trade case, outside of China, in the second trade case, outside of China and Taiwan, into a lot more countries. And we will be seeing some of that happening again, either because there are countries exempt, or we will be seeing movement of some factories into the US. So companies and the government may be saying, yep, that's exactly what our intention was. But let me say, having visited a lot of these factories, this is very much a Jobs Act for robots. This is not a Jobs Act for employees. To put that in perspective, 1 gigawatt of a cell and module capacity employs about 800 people. 1 gigawatt employs 800 people. So if we move everything into the US, the whole US would potentially win about 8,000 jobs. That's it. There's no more jobs given the high level of automation in those factories. The whole industry might lose a lot more on the installation side and the maintenance side. But that's a different argument that obviously didn't carry the day. What else? We have already seen a couple of announcements of possible new factories in the US. And I do expect that we will be seeing a few more. Again, good for the robots, more of them coming to the US. But we will have a shorter supply chain in that regard. On the AE side, of course, we will be evaluating supply alternatives. But do I currently expect any changes? No, I do not. AE, Sunrun have long-term reliable suppliers, and we expect to be sticking with our supply base. Medium term, we will see some uncertainties due to new suppliers coming to the US, setting up new factories. And then, of course, there is at least to the 3 or 9% level, the possibility of additional suppliers exporting to the US. And that will require a very thorough vetting of these new suppliers. And in the last couple of days, I've seen a lot of outreach from potential new suppliers. And that is probably going to continue in the next several weeks. The big challenge here is, having seen that in the shifting industry before, that we really need to ensure the ongoing quality of products. And there are certainly some companies that are now trying to grab the chance of exporting to the US. But we all need to ensure that the product quality is actually comparable to what we have seen in the past, and that the products are going to be satisfactorily performing for the next 25, 30 years. So this is going to be a real big challenge going forward. In the second half of the year, I also expect that some of the US-based new manufacturing will start up, probably more towards Q4 than in Q3, and that we might be seeing some expansion of US-based manufacturing capacities. On the AEE side, again, we will be very carefully vetting new suppliers. Is there a chance that we would be buying from those? Really comes down to the question on what are the results of those vetting processes and the quality of the product that is supposed to be entering the US. Long term, unfortunately, the tariff does not make any distinction between high, medium, and low efficiency panels. However, high efficiency panels, 330 watts, 350 watts, are more expensive to produce. And those panels now get penalized in addition due to the flat rate tariff, meaning it becomes even more expensive to bring those panels into the US. And manufacturing those panels in the US is a very expensive process. So the US is likely going to fall behind on high efficiency panels. That's a unfortunate event, and is going to result in a long-term negative impact for US solar industry. And of course, there is the ongoing uncertainties in regarding to new suppliers. And as Alex rightly pointed out at the beginning, there is no certainty on when those tariffs might be applicable to these new suppliers. That could be retroactive, could be only going forward. There is a high level of uncertainty going into the next years. Uncertainties, again, one thing before we go to the next slide is really around the product quality, and that's what I would like to focus on for the next 2-3 minutes, talking about what Sunrun is doing in order to ensure that we have ongoing high quality. Any manufacturer who wants to supply to Sunrun AE has to go through a qualification process. This qualification process includes factory audits, includes external third-party product audits, and includes a discussion around the service levels that the manufacturers have to provide to Sunrun and Sunrun customers. And then Sunrun performs a final risk assessment, which does include the financial position, the product, and service history of the supplier. Once the manufacturer has passed all these initial steps, Sunrun starts buying from those companies or approving them for the Sunrun approved vendor list. And then we continue the monitoring process, the factory audits, on an ongoing basis. So we continuously watch over the quality of the products that are being supplied to Sunrun. And I would very much encourage everyone to have those discussions just in case you're buying from any other distributors. Discuss this with your distributors on what the distributors are doing in order to ensure the product quality on an ongoing basis. Quality insurance prior to purchasing material helps a lot in order to avoid long-term breakages and product failures. And discussing product breakages or failures, a few topics that we have seen over time in terms of having modules externally tested to the Sunrun criteria, and the criteria have not changed over time. What we see is that manufacturers are very well able to massively increase the product quality delivered. But it's our responsibility to look. It's our responsibility to vet those qualities. And going through factories, we see that sometimes on the inverter side, the soldering has not been done the way we would like to see it. which could result in early failures. But we only catch these things because we go to the factories. We find units that are not ground fault tested, which is a blatant UL certification violation. Again, ask who else is doing that, and the assurance here is that Sunrun is doing it for its suppliers. And then, of course, we see things happening in the field. And here, the same part is auditing the material that goes into the panel. So not only looking into the panel manufacturing itself, but also looking into what goes into those panels is part of the auditing and the manufacturing process, manufacturing oversight process. So all of these things are done in addition to the normal services provided by AE as a distributor in the market. And I really would encourage everyone, if you receive offers regarding to new suppliers, ask those tough questions in order to ensure the long-term viability of the product that we as a whole industry put onto customers' rooftops. And that concludes my remarks, and I'm open for questions.
Okay, thanks, Dirk. So I've got the fun part of the presentation, at least from my perspective, which is to talk to you guys about what we've got in our portfolio today and what we would consider what we plan on having through the balance of the year. So today we've got a variety of modules in a variety of different watt classes from the 5 suppliers you see here. REC Group, of course, LONGi Solar, Hanwha Q Cells, LG, and Mission Solar Energy. So we really try to provide a portfolio that hits, as I said, a variety of different watt class and price points, as well as black on white and black on black offers, in addition to 72 cell modules for commercial rooftop and ground mount projects. So some exciting new products we'll be looking at through the rest of the year. I won't belabor too many of these points because I'm hopeful that we've got some questions coming up here. Safe to say, if you've got any questions on what we have available, what we're looking at, please reach out to your AE representative or submit a question. Submit a question now and we can cover it. Or of course, check us out on our website, aesolar.com, or of course our e-commerce platform, AEE Express. So at this point, Caitlin, I'll turn it over to you, and we can handle any and all questions, time permitting, of course, that have come in.
Thank you, Josh, Alex, Chris, and Dirk. I appreciate it. Just really quickly, we'd like to kind of turn it back to Alex for any closing remarks in regards to the overall trade case. So I'll go ahead and quickly turn it back to Alex to go ahead and send out any closing remarks on that.
Sure, thank you. So now that we have this decision, we have certainty on what it generally looks like with some of the caveats that we're waiting for guidance from the administration and may not get some of that guidance that Dirk and I mentioned. But we know what the tariff looks like, the step downs over 4 years, and that is now our worst case scenario. But it doesn't mean we should accept that status quo. We have built momentum to oppose these tariffs. We spent a lot of time developing that, and we need support from everybody from industry, from companies like yours to continue resisting them. So if you have any desire to help with this effort, to share your story, you can reach out to me directly. Caitlin or Josh can put you in touch with me or share my contact information directly, and I would be happy to recruit you to the effort because we want to push back and see if we can roll these tariffs back and minimize the damage that we see forthcoming.